Give me a minute. I want to talk about the Kherson front because there was an article in the New York Times that called the bridgehead mission on the left bank of the Dnipro a suicide run or a suicide mission. And I understand you got to sell papers, you need a headline. I get it. But those headlines are extremely damaging to the morale of the men, and it's mostly men there, right? So it's no offense to any of the women in the Ukrainian armed forces, of whom there are many, but it is an insult to the brave men and women of the Ukrainian armed forces that are forging that bridgehead every day, to Magyar's drones, who took out count them, four main battle tanks of the Russian Federation this weekend alone. I said back in June that Kherson was going to be potentially the way that they could backdoor this whole Maginot Line bullshit of the front that the Russians had built. And I still believe it might be. Now look, the Ukrainians are making real sacrifices to take the left bank. Meanwhile, the Russians have committed all their troops up north in a desperate attempt to draw the Ukrainians up there. And it's not working because the Ukrainians have their eye on the prize. And so what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to speculate. I'm going to speculate on how this thing plays out over the next 3-4 months, let's say. Here's what I think is going to happen. I don't think this is a suicide run. I think that this is an end run around the defenses of the Russian Federation on the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. That's what I think. I think that increasingly the Ukrainian Marines are going to be coming across that river, are going to be fortifying that bridgehead, are going to be destroying Russian forces down there, like they did to the 810th Brigade and the 104th. And then what's going to happen? Here, let's zoom in. Now, it's tough to see, but right up there, where the force concentrations are right now, is Ukraine's only sand desert. It's essentially impassable for most motorized vehicles, even the treaded ones. It's a no man's land. And right now, the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians out to the sides. And if you can see those two little blue lines I put in there, right, I think those are going to be the borders that they will first secure. So they secure moving out from Krinky to the edges of the sand desert, push the Russians back, and then what they got is they got two short fronts to operate on. They'll have the ability to bring in men and machines. They'll have an established bridgehead and a short front on either side, right, the east and west sides, that they can then expand. From there, once the force concentrations are accumulated, they will push out through the Kherson Oblast in a pattern roughly like that phalanx that you see there, cutting off the rail lines and the supply lines to the entire southern front. And that will leave the Russians withering on the vine. From there, the siege of Crimea begins and the liberation of Zaporizhia. Once Crimea is cut off from the rest of the mainland Ukraine, that's when they blow the Kerch Bridge and the real siege of Crimea begins. And from here, with Zaporizhia, there's no defensive fortifications along there. It's an end run around the defensive fortifications. This is how we're going to see the Kherson Oblast and the Zaporizhia Oblast liberated, and the siege of Crimea undertaken seriously. This is not a suicide mission. This is eye on the prize. This is sacrifice to obtain the true strategic objective and to cut off Crimea in order to reclaim it. I'll tell you something. If I was a Russian in Crimea, I'd be taking advantage of that bridge while it's still fucking there.